Hello everybody, and today I'm going to do a quick overview or maybe comparison of Carrara. In this case, my Carrara is a little bit behind the times. It's version, I want to say 6.1 Pro, I think. As where Blender, I have the latest, and that's 2.69 release candidate 3. And they're quite different, but they're comparable. They're supposedly 3D graphics suites with you do rendering and modeling and stuff like that. And I originally started out way back in what is it, the Price 4 days. I used Price 4 way back then, and but I moved to Carrara after Bryce because I tried Blender in its earlier forms, but it didn't click with me until recently. But I heard somebody say that the 2.5 is when they changed the interface to the one I can figure out. But before then, like 2.3 or 2.4 series, I was lost in Blender. But now this 2.6 series, I think they got it good because they have pop-ups that explain everything and stuff. But let's go back to Carrara. Okay, Carrara is Daz 3D, which I think was originally Eovia software, which is like a French company, but Daz 3D bought it out, and well, they have it as their render engine of choice. Really, their Daz 3D's bread and butter is content, and that works well with Carrara because Carrara has a fairly easy, as you see on the bottom of the screen here, drag and drop, throw stuff on the screen library, you can do scenes, but I'm just going to start file new, and I'll just start an empty scene medium, so at least you can compare working spaces. And Carrara, you have these little icons on the left, and if I recall right, it's been a while since I used it, sorry, but yeah, click an icon and that moves your camera around. So in Carrara, you use these little icons to move around. I believe there's hotkeys as well, but I've always used icons. And this arrow here is actually the sunlight, and Blender will see that we also have a 3D modeling space, and you have to click and hold the middle mouse button to move around and do things. It starts out with just a radial light, but it can be converted to sunlight. And Carrara, you have tabs over here for different things. This is sound, shaders, clips, and you have what are called rooms for doing different things, which is assemble, which is like your main stage. A lot of your assemble tools is comparable to the default mode of Blender for the default layout. So if you want to compare Carrara and Blender, like the rooms here for doing different things, the storyboard is a little laggy in this. Yeah, storyboard is for animation, but it can be a little laggy. You have texturing and rendering. Texturing in some ways is similar to compositing with nodes, but it's still its own different thing because it's Carrara. And Carrara also has the sequencer and the browser as tabs. And Blender does it a little bit different. You can think of the window layouts like rooms in Carrara. So you have different rooms in Carrara like I just showed you. In Blender you have different layouts. So you have, this is like 3D full view for if you want to manipulate space without seeing anything, or it's good for rendering if you know the hotkeys. You have animation, which is in some ways more comparable to using the sequencer in here, just working in the default layout. But like I said, it's also for storyboard as animation. In Carrara, so we go back to Blender, you have compositing, which also does some stuff that Carrara doesn't do, or at least doesn't do in the version I have. So it's not entirely comparable. But for materials, if we go under cycles, and we set up, let's go back to default. Say I want the materials Here to use nodes. Go back to compositing. Node editor is quite comparable to, well, let's get an object in here. Just plop down a cube. I want to do the middle mouse button thing, but it's not the same here. And you also have your tools, like if you select the cube, you get the little arrows to drag and move it. Blender has, let's go back to default, it's a similar thing. You have the arrows for moving it. And if you notice here, you get the different, if you don't see your handles, you got a little button down here you can click to get your manipulator handles. Carrara has handles, I think they're on all the time, but you get different manipulators by clicking these tools over here on the far left. And that's movement, that's scaling, that's rotation, and you have the global do all tool. And Blender has a similar kind of thing where you have movement, rotation, scaling, and I think if you click that, well, I don't know if they have the do all tool, but yeah, it's kind of complicated to explain it. I'm trying to do a quick overview, so, but they are comparable in some ways. And oddly enough, let's see, Carrara has the modeling room. Right now it is just a generic primitive, but if you click convert to other modeler, you get meshes and stuff. And Blender has its, well, you just use it right here, but you go into edit mode and you can edit the mesh. Oddly enough, on both render engines, I rarely ever use the edit mode in either one because I prefer Wings 3D. So I can't really give a fair comparison in that aspect. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But since Blender is always being updated and there's a lot of people doing different things with it, it has a more full-featured modeler from what I understand, is where Carrara's is fairly basic. You can do a lot of things, but you need to get plugins, and as far as I can recall, I don't know if it's the current Carrara does it, but for many years after Daz got Carrara, Hexagon was their main modeler, so they kept their modeling and like scene generation programs kind of separate, and a lot of their content was developed in accordance with Daz Studio, which is like their rigging and posing thing, although Carrara does support rigging and posing too for characters and such. And let's see, Blender has some of the things that Carrara does in rooms that are dedicated to it, like render, all the render settings here. Blender doesn't quite have a room for that, but if you look in the sidebar here, under, what is it? Is it the properties panel? Yeah, I want to say the properties panel. You'll get different things which are comparable to what you find in the render room in Carrara. So if I were to go down here and let's see, this render settings. We did it. Let's clear that. Alright, we have our camera in here. Should we have a camera here somewhere? Well, I'm on the camera, I guess. Not the director view. So this view is the camera. Oh yeah, that's right. Director camera is a separate mode. And somewhere, yes, there is a camera up here. And so in Carrara, you actually start out with the camera in the camera view. In Blender, you are in a separate view and your camera is right here. You hit 0 to number pad to switch to camera view. but they are similar in some ways. I'm trying to remember how I rendered in Carrara. I haven't used it so long. I think it's current scene. Oh yeah, there's more than one mode in. There's the batch queue. It's like setting up multiple renders or for animation or multiple frames. Which batch queue is better for animation, and you have current scene. That's right. So our Blender, you go to render settings here, and you just click render, and instead of batch, there's an animation mode, and instead of batch, you can for animation, you can pick render to video or render to frames. But in Blender, you just hit render here, and we see our generic starting cube. And in Carrara, I go to the current scene and hit render, and we also see our generic starting cube. It looks like I am set up for animation, which I didn't want, but I must have left one of the settings. Last time I used it, I must have did an animation. Alright, so we have rendering output. Yeah. I don't want ABI. Current frame, that's why. So if I hit current frame, there it is, the single image. But you get your rendered image. And then you have your different effects and things. In Carrara, you have some simple volumetrics. Blender, under the cycles render, doesn't have volumetrics yet. You have to go to the default engine and use domains and stuff. It's kind of tricky. And Carrara, one of the really nice things about it is you get the browser for your scenes, objects, shaders, clip, miscellaneous stuff, content, which is like rigged characters, like your dad's 3D characters, I guess, and their clothes and all their stuff. So content under Carrara is like your characters, your rigged people. Dad's content, poser content, and I guess various other rigged characters, artwork. Not sure what that is exactly. I rarely ever use it. I'm sure somebody knows what it is. Objects are like meshes. They're presets. We have terrains and scenery. Some oceans, which I guess are like your oceans. And you have plants, which are objects for putting trees in the scene, leaves, buildings. You know, it's like the 3D equivalent of clip art. You can drag and drop this thing right in the scene, and now you have it in there. If I were to hit scaling and grab from the middle, scale it universally, you have this object, which I guess a beeper. Anyone remember what those are? I vaguely remember them, but, you know. So, you have objects that you can drag and drop. And another cool thing is, if I click on shaders, and I see like a funky, weird shader, that's a preset. I can actually drag and drop a shader onto my model, and bam, I got a shader, which is really cool in Carrara. Blender doesn't quite have anything comparable to that yet, and hopefully in a future version somebody will figure out something like that. You can get shaders and stuff from presets, but they're from other models by using a link library, but there's no browser for it. So if you were to link like different attributes, like my documents, where's the Blender stuff? How do I have it up here? Graphics. Blender stuff, there it is. But like I could go link a material from another Blender project. So any Blender project could be considered like a library of materials. But the thing is I can go here and then I can grab like the materials and stuff, but there is no way to browse what these materials are. So you're left guessing, trying to remember what the material is. It's where Carrara, bam, you have all the presets viewable right in the browser, which is kind of a wonderful thing. I hope a future version of Blender implements something similar to this, where I can actually see what my different presets are. And I don't know about drag and drop, but at least be able to assign them, knowing what they look like beforehand, instead of trying to remember everything, or going and opening another file and then viewing everything and every asset in that file to find the material. As where it is, it's like, oh, right there, drag and drop. In Blender, you gotta, okay, what's this? Or maybe you have to go back and open the file. It's a little trickier. Blender, you got different lights and stuff. Carrara, similar thing. Blender's lights, I think, are more realistic, because the cycles renders kind of cool. It's, what is it, a multipath? Is where Carrara's kind of a ray trace engine, I believe. So, rendering, ray tracing that, hit render. There's really not too much in the scene. And see what else. Sequencer, that's for animation, like I said. Oh, and you have objects, which gives you all your objects in the scene. Oh, instances, this is like your outliner. Blender, you have the outliner up here, and you can expand your objects after its child objects and such. But I have a very basic scene. See if I have anything fancier. I'm trying to remember. A lot of these are experiments. I'm still new to Blender, but it's comparable. This one's kind of neat. Open that one. It's a plain A rig to work in Blender. I showed it in another video. But you see the outliner has all the parts. It's where in Carrara. See file, new, scene. And I believe it keeps up more than one window, yeah. So 3D view, doc 1. And file, I can close that. Don't save. That's doc 4, file. Actually, I might have. Do I have my own objects? For a while there I did, but I can't remember if I ever did it. My objects, I guess. No, I don't have anything assigned. I used to have some of my own things as an object. Miscellaneous. I think these are all just presets. For a while there, I used to have some of my own stuff in here. But I haven't messed with it so long, it's hard to remember where we did with it. But I used to be able to drag and drop. I might have some Carrara files. Let's see, open. And try to remember what it would be if I know. Boop, 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 boop. I'm trying to remember which one would be cool. Alright, I guess the tourist spoof or the hamster. Crouch base. See, it's been a while since I used it. Trying to remember which one's kind of cool. SpaceX car. Speedy car. And I am missing the files, I guess. Oh well. Yeah, they haven't used this so long, so I don't have my files linked where I need those. Or don't remember. But you can see this car has all its parts here. Just like this plane has all its parts here. The armature. Haven't done much rating Carrara there, remember though. Let's go back and render. This one renders tiles going across. Blender, you render it, and generally when it starts out it has this tile starting from the center. You hit escape real quick. And what you can do is set, I don't need them that high right now. Set it low. Just so you can see how it renders. But you can set the way the tiles go across in Blender. If I remember where they are. I know there's a way to do it. That's 3. Up. Oh, right here. Well, you can do top to bottom, left to right, right to left, whatever. Default is center, but I think top to bottom, and it will render the same way Carrara does. At least tiles. I mean, it doesn't use the same engine, obviously, but to get tiles going across the top. And it's a faster render engine at lower settings. It's where Carrara, if I remember right, I don't know if I can mess with the settings. Well, I can change the ray depth and stuff. And number of pixels, radiance maps. So I can do similar thing. Photon count is comparable to samples in Blender, yeah. So, in Carrara they call it photon count, but it's pretty much like your rays being cast out for rendering. And you get accuracies, and I think that's comparable to, what is it? Where is the settings? I'm trying to compare cycles. Light paths. So you have light paths in Blender, which is comparable to, oh, what is it? Ray depth, and I mean there's similarities, but they're obviously they do things different ways. And you have all your settings in the rendering. Like I said, this one it has its own room, as where in Blender you have properties, or what is it? It's like an outliner. You get different layers, the world, settings, controller constraints. These are kind of neat for animation. And Blender also has its own physics model. I believe the current generation of Blender uses Bullet, which is the same physics engine that, or the current release of Carrara uses the same physics engine that Blender does. The interface is probably different, but the underlying programming that it runs on, the engine, is the same now. Oh, what else is there? I'm trying to think of some of the stuff. I mean, if you can figure out this one, you can hop into the current release of Blender right now and see the render storyboard. Storyboard is comparable to animation here. You got your timelines, your dope sheets, your sequences. Do I have anything rigged in here? I believe I have a driver set up. I don't know if I have any real big animation stuff going on here. I think I just have a throttle controller. If I can drag this over here. Yeah, throttle control right there. So if I were to play that. Oh, I don't have scripting turned on, that's why right here. Something you gotta watch out for in Blender, they have scripts. And latest release, they disabled scripting because, like I said, there are people that screw around and being jerks, and they'll release files with that stuff. Well, most files, you can trust that it's not messed up. Let's just reload trusted. I made it so I know it's trusted. If I click that, there, you got the propeller spinning, see? Pretty simple. Stuff like that. I don't have anything comparable in Carrara, but if I had a script, I guess we could go... Oh, there were plugins I had under modifiers, I believe. Behavior modifiers. So under Carrara, a lot of stuff is considered modifiers that in Blender modifiers are for like altering the mesh, but you have behaviors or constraints. Oh, so Carrara has constraints too. But yeah, deformations. A lot of stuff that is still different, but they have equivalents, so you can do a lot of the same stuff. Just trying to say. Anyhow, I was talking to some guy that's like a really good Carrara pro to check out the latest release of Blender, because it is easy enough to use once you get over a few of the quibbles in the interface. Like, what is it? Preferences? Like select with left and right, for some reason when it starts out it's on the right. I think the original person, one of the early developers of Blender had to be a lefty, because that's why the mouse buttons are backwards. That's the only good explanation for some of these things. But you can change that. So what I do is I change that to begin with, change it to the left. And then I also turn on continuous grab, because when you're moving stuff in the scene, if you go off the scene without that turned on, it will stop on you, and it does not lock the mouse position to the scene. So when you turn continuous grab on it, well, other apps you don't have that problem, but it's weird in Blender. Like I said, Andrew Price is talking about getting some of the interface stuff changed to be more consistent with everything else that's done on a computer, and if that ever happens, this Blender just might have a lot of the stuff that Carrara has. In regards to the browser, it's the only big thing that's different. And you also have animation clips, but I don't have any here. And you get more scenes in here. I believe this has scenes too. But darn it, I can't remember it. You have physics tab, filters. Filters is kind of like what you do with compositing, but they're their own thing. Similar with effects. Some of the effects have to do with lighting, which in Blender is under the World tab. So like ambient lighting and atmosphere and background in Blender, you will find them under the World tab. And you have general stuff, which is like your object properties, which is comparable to your object tab down here. And also you have different attributes to an object, like linking and all that stuff, which is comparable to modifiers applied to an object. Shading effect. Shading here is comparable to, so like if I select something, materials, so that's very comparable to the shading tab here. What else? Motion. That is comparable to your constraints, and I want to say physics. So if you stuff you find under motion tab is very comparable to the physics tab. Particles, oops. Particles in Carrara are kind of their own thing. You can attach them, they're like a separate model or entity. As where in Blender, it is an attribute or a modifier that you add to an object. So it's a little different in that way. But let's see what else is there. At Carrara, you have what are called target objects, target helper objects, which in Blender you have empty objects, which kind of do the same, similar purpose. You have add menu, you have your timeline down here. Carrara, you have your sequencer timeline. Like I said, it's comparable also to animation. Blender, you also have game logic and scripting and UV editing. UV editing is part of the model room in Carrara. Like I said, I can't really give a good overview of that, so I use Wings to do that in both programs. And video editing is something that is unique to Blender. Carrara doesn't have anything like that. So this is one aspect of Blender that is unique, and it's unique compared to a lot of other 3D software too, because a lot of other 3D software you have to go to After Effects, or what is it, Premiere or something like that, or Vegas to do the same thing as where in Blender, once you've done your 3D, you can do your video editing in the same software. It's really kind of neat. Scripting, Carrara has a way to do scripting. Oh, wait. But I think it is applied under modifiers. There's a plugin for, was it Carrara? No, there was a plugin, and I think the current version actually has it built into the program. But you'll have to research that if you're a Carrara user. Blender, you have to know Python, and Carrara, it has a plugin for Python, or in the latest version I think it also supports Python. But they all have their own separate APIs specific to the software, so some of the things you can do in Carrara isn't going to be same as in Blender. Under materials, I would not be surprised if Blender has an update. So this is similar to, hold on a second, compositing. Yep. This is similar to the nodes. The layout's a little different, but actually if you go to just default, if you were to go under the properties here and how this layout is for giving material on an object, how they're laid out in this aspect. If you go to the material view on your object properties, this layout is very comparable to the material layout in Blender. What I was going to say, Blender has this open shading language thing, which they are doing to implement, and I would not be surprised if Daz keeps Carrara going if they implement a similar feature. It's not yet, but since they have bullet physics, I would not be surprised if they do implement that in the future. But that's just a quick comparison side by side. I know it's not the greatest. Somebody else is qualified to do a better one, but I'm just trying to do this on my lunch break, give you an idea. So when you go to if you're coming from Carrara and you want to look at Blender, you can find a lot of the same things. There are hotkeys, but like I said, you don't really need to know them. Some things you can drag around. That's one thing that might confuse you. If you drag these windows around, it's very easy to lose them. I believe this one is T for tools. There's another one that comes up for properties, which is N. Why N? I don't know. Maybe it's nonsense or newbie, or I don't know, but N is the key for that one. Or you have these bars. What you gotta watch out for are these plus things. You can spawn new windows easy. It's cool for layout, but if you're new to it, you might get lost in. There's other videos on the Blender interface that can help explain those things, clear up some confusion. But one of the things is that some menus, sometimes you'll adjust things and they go off the screen. Like, how do I get that? I have to drag this out all the time. Or same down here, it like overlaps. Don't worry too much. If you hover over that area, you can scroll with the middle mouse button to get those things, to get access to everything. The same here, you can scroll the middle mouse button, so if stuff overlaps and you don't need to use those things on that side, you can just move them over. But this quick overview, just trying to compare Carrara to Blender a little bit. I talked to a guy who's a real good Carrara pro and explaining things. His name's Cripeman. I'm sure you've seen him if you're a Carrara user. And I asked him to do an overview, and hopefully once this computer gets fixed and he gets things running good again, he'll do an overview and go in a lot more depth than I do. Mine's just a quick run through, give you a feel for some things so you can bring in your models. Yeah, Blender also has import, so wavefront. Just keep in mind when you're importing into Blender that you want to drag down to see these settings. And Blender normally does like well, they changed it now, but it used to be that Y was up, then internally to, or Y forward actually. Y forward. In Blender, Y is forward. That's another thing that might confuse you is, here, Z is up. So, where is it? Maybe it's the same, I don't know. Hold on a sec. Maybe it's the thing different between, oh, it's different between wings, I know that much. Wings 3D. So Z is up in Blender, it's also up in Carrara, but this one starts out with the Y-axis going that way, and this one starts out with it going the other way, I believe. Okay, so Z is up in both of these, but sometimes when you're modeling in a 3D space, so that you gotta watch out for the orientation when you import. They both import OBJ. This one, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. It'll import all types of files from the start. Blender, you kind of have to pick what you're importing first and then go from there. But it's not too bad. And you got your paths and stuff. Sometimes, I think a Carrara, mostly attribute paths and stuff, it should start out from a path. I skip past it because I don't have them linked. This one, you might have to go back into your materials and figure out what your paths are for UVs, and go to UV editing and assign all the materials from here and stuff. But I'm not going to get into all that. It's involved. But just to give you an idea, you can do a lot of the same things. But since Blender is more up to date, it does more things than Carrara, to be honest. So Carrara is falling behind Blender now, even the latest version. Just so you get a heads up, and you get a really nice render engine. The default render engine, hold on a sec. The default render engine, not this one, but here, Blender render, it involves some kind of like fake lighting, and it's cool for doing some things, and some effects like particles and smoke you can only do in the default. But the materials handling is a little bit more fakey in this one, as where if you use cycles, it's a more realistic way of doing it, and lighting setup is a lot easier. So if you want to compare render engines, I would look at, let's see, if you want the photorealistic renderer, non-photorealistic, well actually that's a totally different kind of render engine. But the photorealistic renderer here with a lot of stuff turned on is more comparable to cycles in some way than the default in Carrara, so. Or yeah. Or I'm just saying the default. Pardon me. Sorry about that. The photorealistic renderer in Carrara you'll probably be happier using the cycles renderer than you would the default renderer in Blender. And you get really good results. And just on low setting like I messed with before, if I go to render here, click on render, it looks really nice. If I can speed up, I probably went back to high setting. Let's see. Yeah. But if I go even in 20, like low samples here, yeah, really nice. It's going to be noisier, obviously, but if you look at it, the paint and the lighting and the blurs, well, there's really no penalty for motion blur in Blender as we're in Carrara. If you add the motion blur to render settings, it really slows it down. Pardon me. And I think it's because the way Carrara does its motion blur is different, or how it calculates it. It has to render multiple frames to calculate motion blur, as where this one pre-calculates the motion blur before it renders, and then there's really hardly any penalty, which is kind of nice. So if you're doing single frames with this effect applied, it looks pretty cool. You can see even at a low setting where you get it to render fast, you get very nice shading effects. But you will have noise and such, and that's why you want to use a higher setting in your final project. Animation, you can get away with some noise. And in Blender, there is, what is it, seed, right here, seed value, because it changes the random source for your ray trace. But you can actually change that to frame, I believe, and that changes your seed to match your current frame. Yeah, right here, see. And for animation, that's a good idea to do that, because then your noise will be random instead of looking at weird continuous noise. It's hard to explain. It's like the static you get in a normal video or photography, or the noise you get film. It's like rain. But I don't know. I'll leave that up to you to figure out. I'm just trying to give you the quickest explanation. It's probably a half hour already, so I'm going to tidy up, wrap it up. Saying, if you're familiar with Carrara, don't be afraid to try the current Blender right now. It's easy enough to use, to go through, look at, get a feel for that. So if you're out there using Carrara and you're like, it had a memory crash again and stuff, and do a facepalm, just hop over to Blender and give it a shot. And it's not that scary. Rigging is probably one of the best things in Blender too. It automatically calculates weights for rigging and stuff, and I just tried on something really simple, and it worked awesome without me even having to think about it. And then me being a noob to Blender, that says something. So give it a shot, try it out. Like I said, if you're used to Carrara, try Blender. If you're used to Blender, you probably might not be interested in Carrara, but the other way around. It's worth it. It doesn't cost you anything. Just go hop over, download, and plug around. I'm sure you'll figure it out pretty quick, because I did. Alright, goodbye.